Imagine being trapped on a freezing, uncharted subarctic island. It is November 1741, and the howling winds of the Bering Sea are tearing through your tattered clothes. Your ship has been destroyed, your commander is dying, your crewmates are dropping one by one, their bodies ravaged by scurvy, their teeth falling out, their strength completely exhausted. Starvation is no longer a threat, it is a slow, agonizing reality. As you stare out into the churning, icy waters, desperate for any sign of salvation, you see something impossible. Massive, dark shapes are bobbing just offshore. At first glance, they look like overturned hulls of sunken galleons, but then you hear a deep, echoing snort, and a plume of mist erupts into the freezing air. You are looking at a living leviathan, a creature so enormous, so utterly bizarre that it defies human comprehension. This was no sea monster, though. This was the Stellers sea cow, a gentle 10-ton giant that had survived the Ice Age only to meet its most ruthless predator, us. What follows is not just a tale of discovery, but one of the most shocking, rapid, and heart-wrenching exterminations in the history of our planet. In just 27 short years, a mere blink in the eye of evolutionary time, every single one of these magnificent creatures would be wiped off the face of the earth, eaten into oblivion. Let us rewind to the beginning of this tragedy. In the early 18th century, the Great Northern Expedition, one of the most ambitious and well-funded scientific and exploratory ventures ever conceived, under the command of the legendary Captain Vitus Bering, the crew of the ship St. Peter was tasked with mapping the uncharted waters between Siberia and North America. Aboard this vessel was a brilliant, meticulous, and incredibly resilient German naturalist named Georg Wilhelm Steller. Steller was a man of insatiable curiosity, chosen to document the undiscovered flora and fauna of the New World. But the expedition was doomed to catastrophe. Battered by relentless storms and lost in the treacherous North Pacific, the St. Peter ran aground on a desolate, uninhabited piece of rock that would later be named Bering Island. The crew was stranded in a frozen hell. Captain Bering himself would soon perish from illness, leaving the surviving, disease-ridden sailors to face a brutal winter with dwindling supplies. It was in this desperate frozen wasteland that Steller made his legendary discovery. Walking along the shoreline, hunting for dry wood to keep the freezing men alive, he noticed the massive black shapes grazing in the shallow waters. Steller, ever the scientist, even in the face of death, pulled out his notebook and began to observe. He realized that these creatures belonged to the order of Sirenians, making them relatives of the modern manatee and dugong. But the scale of this animal was entirely unprecedented. A fully grown Stellers sea cow was an absolute behemoth. They measured up to 30 feet in length, longer than a killer whale, and weighed an astonishing 22,000 pounds. That's 11 tons of pure muscle, bone, and fat. To survive in the freezing subarctic waters, far from the warm tropical habitats of their modern cousins, the sea cow had evolved a massive layer of blubber that was up to 4 inches thick.
Their appearance was as fascinating as their size. They lacked the sleek, torpedo-like grace of dolphins or whales. Instead, they possessed a massive, rotund body ending in a forked tail fluke. Their skin was entirely unique in the animal kingdom. It was an inch thick, brownish-black, and heavily corrugated, resembling the rugged bark of an ancient oak tree. This tough hide protected them from being battered against the sharp rocks of the shallow reefs where they fed, and insulated them from the deadly cold. When Steller looked closely at their heads, he noted a small, disproportionate face with a downward-pointing snout. Most surprisingly, the giant had no teeth. Instead, it possessed 2 hard, keratinous plates in its mouth and a dense array of white, interlacing bristles on its upper lip. They use these bristles to tear away massive stalks of kelp, their only source of food, grinding the tough seaweed between the ribbed plates before swallowing. Because of their incredibly high fat content, these sea cows were highly buoyant. They could not fully submerge themselves, leaving their massive, bark-like backs constantly exposed to the biting wind and the eyes of hungry sailors. Take a moment and think about this. Imagine looking into the eyes of a 10-ton giant that could easily crush you with a single thrash of its mighty tail. If you waded into the water, it wouldn't flee. It would simply let you stroke its back. Would you see a marvel of nature, an ancient survivor of a bygone era, or would you just see an endless supply of meat? For the starving crew of the St. Peter, the answer was a matter of survival. But the behavior of these gentle giants makes their ultimate fate incredibly difficult to stomach. According to Steller's meticulous journals, the sea cows were deeply emotional and highly social creatures. They lived in small, tightly knit family groups. When they grazed in the shallow kelp forests, the adults would form a protective ring, keeping the vulnerable calves safely in the center. But it was their capacity for loyalty and grief that truly shocked the naturalist. The sea cows were monogamous, mating for life. Steller recorded heart-wrenching accounts of their devotion. If a sea cow was harpooned by the sailors, its mate would not swim away to save itself. Instead, the partner would desperately charge the boat, throwing its massive weight against the ropes in a frantic attempt to snap the harpoon line and free its lover. Even more devastating, if the hunters succeeded in dragging the slain creature to the beach, the surviving mate would follow the blood trail to the shore. Steller observed one male sea cow that lingered in the shallow waters next to the dead body of its mate for 2 entire days, refusing to eat, refusing to leave, simply waiting for a partner that would never wake up. They possessed a profound bond that we usually only attribute to highly intelligent mammals like elephants, whales, or ourselves. Yet this beautiful innocence was their tragic flaw. Having evolved in an isolated environment with absolutely no natural predators, the sea cows had never learned to fear anything. They had no instinct to flee from humans. Steller noted that the men could wade directly into the water and walk right up to them, even petting their thick, rough skin without causing the slightest alarm. They were sitting ducks. The starving Russian sailors, desperate for sustenance, eventually figured out how to hunt the massive beasts. It was no easy task at first, requiring heavy iron hooks and the combined strength of dozens of men to drag the buoyant, thrashing 10-ton animal onto the beach. But once they secured their first catch, the fate of the entire species was irrevocably sealed.
The men could scarcely believe what they had found. A single Steller sea cow provided an astronomical amount of food. One carcass yielded enough meat to feed 33 starving men for an entire month. But it wasn't just the quantity of the food, it was the extraordinary quality. The meat was described as tender, nourishing, and incredibly flavorful, remarkably similar to premium beef. However, the true prize was the blubber. The massive 4-inch thick layer of fat did not taste like the foul, fishy blubber of a whale or seal. According to the sailors, it was incredibly sweet, tasting exactly like premium almond oil. When boiled down, it produced a clear, odorless butter that could be stored for months without spoiling. Even the milk of the female sea cows was consumed, noted for its thick, sweet richness. The sea cow was an absolute miracle for the stranded crew. Thanks to this endless, high-quality food source, the surviving men regained their strength, cured their scurvy, and managed to rebuild a small boat from the wreckage of the St. Peter. In August 1742, they finally sailed away from the island, bringing Steller's scientific notes and the tantalizing tales of a giant, delicious, easily hunted sea cow back to the Russian Empire. This is where the story shifts, from a tale of desperate human survival to one of unchecked, horrifying greed. When the crew returned to the mainland, word of the Bering Island miracle spread like wildfire. But the listeners weren't interested in the scientific marvel of the animal, they were interested in the economics. The northern Pacific was teeming with sea otters, whose pelts were the most valuable fur in the world at the time, highly prized in the lucrative Chinese markets. Russian fur traders, known as the Przemysłenniki, began launching heavily armed expeditions into the Bering Sea to slaughter the otters. And they knew exactly where to stop for supplies. The Commander Islands became the ultimate prehistoric drive-through for these ruthless fur hunters. Why pack months of expensive, heavy provisions when you could just sail to Bering Island and easily slaughter a 10-ton cow that literally swam up to your boat? The hunting turned into an absolute blitzkrieg. Year after year, wave after wave of Russian ships descended upon the tiny, restricted habitat of the sea cow. The traders didn't hunt for survival. They hunted with the reckless, wasteful entitlement of men who believed the ocean's bounty was infinite. The slaughter was wildly inefficient and exceptionally cruel. Rather than carefully harpooning and securing one animal, the hunters would stand on the shore and shoot or spear multiple sea cows in the water, hoping the tide would conveniently wash the massive bodies onto the beach. But because the sea cows were so buoyant, the vast majority of the wounded animals simply drifted out to sea, bleeding to death in agony, their precious meat sinking to the bottom of the ocean or rotting on distant shores. For every one sea cow successfully butchered, it is estimated that 5 more died needlessly from their wounds.
The sea cow population simply could not withstand this onslaught. They were slow to mature, and the females underwent a gestation period of over a year, likely giving birth to only a single calf at a time. They could not replenish their numbers. The freezing winters naturally thinned the kelp forests, meaning the animals were already stressed and fasting during the colder months. When you add a relentless wave of human predators armed with iron harpoons and muskets, the mathematics of extinction become terrifyingly clear. Modern population models suggest that there were likely fewer than 3,000 of these majestic giants left when Steller first laid eyes on them. They were a remnant population, the last survivors of a wider prehistoric range that had shrunk due to climatic changes at the end of the Ice Age. They were already walking a tightrope of survival. Humanity simply came along and violently pushed them off the edge. By 1754, the sea cows had been entirely eradicated from nearby Copper Island. The hunters then focused all their destructive energy on the final stronghold, Bering Island. In 1768, a Russian explorer named Martin Sauer arrived in the region and noted a chilling silence. A mere 27 years after Georg Wilhelm Steller first stood on that frozen beach and marveled at the gentle giants bobbing in the kelp, the very last Steller sea cow was slaughtered. The species was gone, extinct, wiped from the fabric of existence. To the men who committed this eradication, the concept of extinction didn't even exist. In the 18th century worldview, nature was a divinely ordained pantry, an endless supply created solely for human consumption. The idea that mankind could permanently erase an entire species from the earth was inconceivable to them. They simply believed the sea cows had moved somewhere else, but they hadn't. The Stellers sea cow became the first marine mammal in modern history to be driven to extinction by human greed, predating the tragic fates of the great auk and the passenger pigeon. Today, the only physical remnants we have of these magnificent titans are a few dusty skeletons sitting in museums, a tragic testament to a creature that loved too fiercely and trusted too easily. The story of the Steller sea cow is not just a piece of historical trivia. It is a haunting mirror held up to humanity. It forces us to look at our own capacity for destruction when we view nature solely as a resource to be exploited, rather than a living system to be respected. The sea cow survived the brutal, shifting climates of the Ice Age, only to be devoured by the insatiable appetite of modern man in less than 3 decades. If we do not learn from this 27-year tragedy, we are bound to repeat it with the countless endangered species currently hanging in the balance of our world's changing ecosystems. What are your thoughts on this forgotten tragedy? Do you think humanity has actually learned from the fate of the Steller sea cow, or are we still making the exact same mistakes with the oceans today? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below.
If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share this video with a fellow history or nature lover, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more incredible, shocking, and true stories from the depths of our world's history. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.